Did Chris MacFarland tip his hand as to the future between Gabe Landeskog and the Colorado Avalanche? Is Shedeur Sanders starting to rub some NFL teams the wrong way post-scouting combine? And we have a special guest joining us at the end of the show to reveal the latest in our countdown of the top 30 storylines in the last 30 years, our Mile High Milestones feature. All things to come on today's rundown, but we begin on the ice as Avalanche general manager Chris MacFarland spoke to the media yesterday and covered a lot of things from the team's trade deadline plans, some of the moves they made as recently as this past weekend, and how it projects their future before Friday's deadline and the playoff ceiling for the 2024-2025 season. He also spoke about Avalanche captain Gabe Landeskog, who is entering his third season without playing hockey. He has not played for the Avalanche in a game that means something since they won the Stanley Cup in the 2021-2022 season. When asked about Gabe's future, MacFarland said something pretty telling, I think, if you listen closely. He said, quote, "Gabe continues to rehab, but I don't foresee him joining practice in the next day or two or week or two here. So I think you guys can figure out where this is going, but I hope it'll keep going." Now, there's a couple of things to dissect there. One, he basically tells you the thought of Gabe Landeskog coming back in the regular season, we can put that to bed. I think that MacFarland, if we hadn't already done it in our own minds, basically said there that Gabe Landeskog is going to miss a third consecutive regular season of hockey. And then he's on long-term injured reserve. So is there the possibility that the Avalanche go the route of the Vegas Knights with Mark Stone and bring him off of long-term injured reserve for the postseason, where that cap hit no longer counts against them? You know, a nice little loophole that NHL teams are liking to exploit in recent years. Doesn't sound that promising either, because you start to say day or two, week or two. We've got only about 15 or 20 games left in the regular season by the time things get rolling again. And then even then, that's a short ramp to expect Gabe Landeskog to come back after basically missing hockey for 3 years. It'll be 3 years in June. And be Gabe. So I think that's a hefty expectation. More likely than not, I think that we really need to start having a conversation that we've had the last couple of years, but this year and this particular season feels like it takes a different turn, because what I took from that, based on the last part of MacFarland's quote there, which was, I think you all can see where this is going. You could read that as simply as he's going to miss the regular season. He's probably not coming back in the postseason. To me, I read that as, we have done this dance for 3 years with our captain and Gabe Landeskog, and it's not getting any better, or at least not better enough to warrant a significant shift in expectation from where we're currently at. And that is what I think that Chris MacFarland meant, speaking on behalf of the organization, as it relates to Gabe and his continued rehab. Now, that's not to say anything negative about Gabe. Gabe is the captain of this team. He's been the captain for more than a decade. They absolutely do not win a Stanley Cup without him. And the injury and rehab that he's facing is quite literally unprecedented in hockey, in the National Hockey League. We saw a similar knee cartilage replacement surgery with Lonzo Ball in the NBA. His recovery was lengthy and littered with setbacks, and it was questioned whether or not he'd be able to play basketball again. He has returned to playing basketball since and has had to kind of monitor and gauge things, but he doesn't appear to be the same player that he was pre-injury when he was taken highly in the draft and had a lot of promise coming out of UCLA. So as it relates to Gabe, I truly think that we are reaching a point where what's best for the individual player and what's best for the team are no longer aligned. And because of that, there's a fork in the road. Now, this is probably a unique fork, because I think there's 3 ways that you could go on this fork, a Sun Devil fork, I suppose. Is Gabe can retire, and he would be revered and remembered forever as a Colorado Avalanche legend. His jersey, one way or the other, will hang in the rafters one day, and it would remove the burden from the Avalanche of having to navigate keeping that contract and juggling the long-term injured reserve and trying to build a team without a key piece, but still keeping the possibility and the hope alive of a key piece. So that's one prong that he could take. Another prong is they could just move on from Gabe. They could cut him. They could release him. But with that comes cap penalties. And the Avalanche, in the hardest salary cap sport of the four major sports that we have here in America, who are already facing tough cap constraints with the roster and the bloated contracts in the top six that they have. And I say bloated not in a negative sense, as if they're not worth their money, but they just have a lot of money between Nate and Val and Cale all tied up into their top six, that they're already working with cap constraints. Taking on a dead cap figure or a salary cap penalty that would come as a result of cutting Gabe Landeskog is not necessarily ideal either, which leaves one prong remaining that I think that the Avs can explore, and I think it's one that they should explore. It may not have the most immediate satisfaction, but I think it could present a positive mindset shift for the Avs, which is they move forward today as if they are never going to have Gabe Landeskog play meaningful hockey for them ever again. They leave him on long-term injured reserve for the remainder of his contract, and it as if he is frankly not even there. They give the captain role. They take the C off of Gabe Landeskog's jersey and they give it to Cale Makar, or they give it to somebody else. I've never been a huge fan of giving it to Nathan MacKinnon. I think he's a better assistant captain than he is a true captain, in the same way that I felt like Von Miller, who was the best player on the Broncos for many years, was not the best fit for a captain. Give it to Cale Makar. Keep the captain's presence in the room, and he's no longer looming on the outside of the organization. But he stays on long-term injured reserve. He's still technically on the team, but his salary cap constraints for the next 4 years that he has remaining on his 7-year, $56 million contract are no longer of consequence to the Avs. They don't have to pressure or feel the need to urge any kind of retirement. They don't have to cut him, but we can no longer continue to make Gabe Landeskog, in my opinion, a reasonable, realistic option for a return to the Avalanche going forward. It's just not something that I think is healthy for the organization, who still has to balance competing for Stanley Cups and maximizing the windows of Nathan MacKinnon, Cale Makar, etc., and a championship window that they have. Gabe can no longer be a part of that, and he can no longer impact decisions that could pull that window closed quicker than it already is. So that would be the course of action I think I would take if I was him, because if I was Chris MacFarland, if I was the Colorado Avalanche organization, because you can't continue to feel like you have your hands tied in that sense. I love Gabe. It has nothing to do with him as a player. I can't imagine the grueling nature of a rehab that someone like Gabe is having to go through, of going 2.5 to 3 years without any sort of gratification to get back on the ice and play the game that he loves at a time where he was playing some of his best hockey, in a sense. So I empathize with that, but I empathize with Chris MacFarland, and ultimately I think I side with Chris MacFarland and the Colorado Avalanche when I say that a change fundamentally from the way that we look at the Colorado Avalanche has to change regardless of the results of this regular season and postseason, centered around Gabe Landeskog and the prospect of his return. Speaking of prospect, Shedeur Sanders ruffled some feathers, it sounds like, at the NFL scouting combine this past weekend when he gave what I would think is fair to describe as a bit of a fiery interview, or some fiery answers. I don't think he was standing at the podium and finger pointing and shouting in a sense of fiery, but he got people talking, and his answers certainly didn't lack swagger or bravado. When asked about the prospect of bringing him in and having to take on the potential of rebuilding an NFL franchise, Shedeur Sanders had a lot to say. Quote, "We went from Jackson State to Colorado and changed 2 programs back to back. You don't think I could come to an NFL franchise and change a program again?" So clearly, Shedeur is not worried about the prospect of taking on another franchise. He went on to say, "If you ain't trying to change the franchise or the culture, don't get me. You should know history repeats itself over and over, and I've done it over and over. It should be no question why an NFL franchise should pick me. Shedeur Sanders, growing up as the son of Deion Sanders, is certainly not one who lacks confidence or bravado, earned or unearned. And I think that's an important distinction here as it relates to Shedeur and some of the criticism coming around him, is that I do think Shedeur Sanders has earned some of the bravado that he has done. He is not a complete coattail rider in a sense that his athletic accomplishments and his merits on the field aren't worthy of recognition at the NFL level. Does he get a little bit of a bump? Are there some wheels that were greased because his father is primetime Deion Sanders? Sure. But this isn't a situation where you have a Shedeur Sanders who's born on third base and telling you he's hit a triple. Shedeur has gone out there and done things to be able to make his own mark and his own name in college football and in the NFL. But I think the quote that really rubbed people the wrong way, and I think Shedeur maybe knew what he was doing when he phrased it this way, was this. He said, quote, "You think I'm worried about what critics or people have got to say? Do you know who my dad is? They hated on him too. So it's almost normal. Without people hating, it's not normal for us. We like the adversity. We like everything that comes with the name. That's why we are who we are." So that, in essence, it was Shedeur's way of saying, I'm not fazed by detractors and critics. I grew up in the limelight. The spotlight is no stranger to me, and therefore I'm not fazed by people who don't think I can do what I can do, or who think I'm only here because of what my father did. I think Shedeur worded it that way on purpose. I think that it's very on brand for him to do that, but I don't think it's necessarily untrue. And I think what you are already starting to see is some negative wave and pushback and publicity against Shedeur Sanders that has one of two origins. One, it's just the old fuddy-duddy club of NFL scouts and insiders and front offices who see someone in Shedeur Sanders who zags where they zig, who has a loud and bright personality that they don't feel like is worth trying to manage or is warranted to try to manipulate. Or you have the dirty side of the NFL where teams are interested in getting Shedeur Sanders, but like most good businesses, they don't want to have to overpay for that. And you could see some negative publicity coming out about Shedeur Sanders in an attempt to maybe see his draft stock slide a little bit, where a team can then acquire him at a discount where he was once charging a premium. And I think that that's kind of just a sticky, unfortunate aspect of the NFL and of professional sports because of the business nature that's infused in it. But I, for one, am not going to jump on the bully pulpit and overreact to something that Shedeur Sanders has said at the NFL scouting combine that Josina Anderson and others have now pumped out. We saw Josina Anderson report that there were teams drafting in the top 7 who found Shedeur arrogant and crass and things of that nature. And while he may have those moments, I think that's okay to a certain degree when it comes to your NFL quarterback. I don't think that it's a bad thing that your quarterback is overly confident and has the bravado and the presence to kind of show it and not be afraid to be who he is. So we'll see as it relates to Shedeur how things kind of shake out as the draft draws ever closer. I think teams' free agency moves with guys like Sam Darnold and other quarterbacks on the market, we could see some shifting in the QB needy teams and where their interest is at the top of the draft. But it is time officially for the second installment of our new series that we have going on in celebration of the 30th anniversary of Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan. It is our Mile High Milestones presented by your local Ford dealers. And yesterday we spoke with Ryan Spielborgs to illuminate us on the magical 2010 season of Ubaldo Jimenez, his former teammate, and just the excitement that brought. And coincidentally, number 29 on our Mile High Milestones list has to do with another famous Rocky, maybe the most famous Rocky of all time, and that is Todd Helton. To join me today to reminisce on this walk down memory lane, we have Patrick Saunders of the Denver Post. Patrick, always good to see you, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing terrific. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Patrick, I appreciate you joining us here today. As I kind of mentioned in the lead in there, we are celebrating our 30th anniversary here at 104.3 The Fan, and we sought out amongst ourselves to try to pinpoint the 30 biggest sports storylines of the last 30 years since we turned our signal on the airwaves. And the consensus amongst all of the voting came in and came out when you're factoring in all of the professional and collegiate sports across the state. Todd Helton's Hall of Fame induction just a couple of years ago has now landed at number 29. You are somebody that's been as closely tied to the Colorado Rockies as anyone in this state. And I certainly always appreciate your insight and your opinion. What did Todd Helton's time as a Rocky signify to you?
Great question. And thanks for having me on to talk about Todd. First of all, let me say, I know that I have never been as close to an athlete, probably as I've gotten to know Todd through all the ups and downs, post-career, etc. He's cantankerous. He can be difficult, but he's a really special athlete and a really special person. I was thrilled that he got in last summer. The thing that stands out to me about Todd, and especially the Hall of Fame, to me, you say Hall of Fame, so it's not just the Hall of War or Hall of Statistics, it's Hall of Fame. In an age where very few players remain with one organization for their entire career, be it baseball, NFL, NBA, whatever. Todd stuck around for 17 years. Early part of his career was off the charts sensational. Middle part of his career was solid, not great because of injuries, etc. Latter part of his career was subpar. But all in all, he was and is the face of the Rockies. And the thing that stands out to me is that his presence in the clubhouse, on the field, and even now when he contributes a little bit as a special assistant for the Rockies, made him an icon, a Colorado sports icon. And that's what I think about Todd Helton.
Yeah, no, it's no secret. I mean, his number 17 jerseys, you still see them out at Coors Field when you scan across the ballpark. He's got the fixture in the concourse there. And you touched on it. The next thing I kind of wanted to get to, which is he played for 17 years in Major League Baseball for the same organization. And that is something that I think is, for that length of time, I think is rare for almost any professional sport. But why is it that you think that in baseball we don't see guys sticking around for quite as long, especially if they are, of the type of caliber or quality as a player that they could go chase things elsewhere?
Well, it's the money.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, guaranteed contracts for free agency as opposed to the other sports where, yeah, you get some of the money, but not all of it's guaranteed. In baseball, it's all guaranteed. And, players and their agents, they chase the big bucks. And they try to cash in as soon as they can, and they know that their peak performing years are usually 27, maybe 26 through early 30s. And, the other side of the equation is teams know that, and they have to calculate where they're going to spend their bucks. I mean, you look all around baseball. I mean, almost every player you can think of has played for a different organization at one time or another. And some of the greatest players in the game over the last, 25 years have played for multiple organizations. That's what makes Todd so unique. Right before the 2007 season, he came a whisker away from being a Boston Red Sox. And turns out, of course, the Rockies in their one and only World Series ended up playing the Red Sox. Talk about irony.
Yep.
But I think that's one of the things Todd was most proud of, is the fact that he did stay with one organization for his entire career. And I think it's one of the reasons he got in the Hall of Fame, because he was a borderline case for a lot of national voters. But I think the fact that he was so good early and put up historic numbers, and the fact that he was the face of a franchise, helped get him into Cooperstown.
Yeah, and you mentioned him almost leaving. And I think that we saw Todd wasn't the first Rocky to be entered into the Hall of Fame. Larry Walker was enshrined in 2020, and Larry Walker spent a decade with the organization, at 20th and Blake, but he started his career in Canada. He finished it in St. Louis. And while some may argue that Larry Walker may be the greatest player to ever wear a Rockies uniform, I think there's also a fair argument to say that Todd Helton is the greatest Rocky of all time. Do you think that there's a fair distinction there?
Oh, I think it's definitely fair. I think Larry Walker was certainly the most gifted, or one of the most gifted, most talented players in Rockies history. But he also wasn't the warrior that Todd Helton was. I mean, one of the knocks against Larry, and I think he was deserving, was he didn't post up all the time. I mean, he did tend to, I got a nagging injury here, I got a nagging injury there, I'm not quite into playing today. Todd Helton never did that. And I always respected him for that, because he played hurt a lot, where Larry Walker sometimes probably could have played and didn't. And I think that's one of the differences between the two players. And I think that's why Todd Helton is more beloved within the organization than Larry is ever going to be. That and the fact that Larry started with the Expos, came to Colorado, and then it finished up in St. Louis. As far as the most talented or the best overall player in Rockies history, I think you got to put Arenado in that equation.
He has to be.
Right? Because his numbers, maybe at his peak offensively, weren't Helton-like, but they were really, really good. And I still maintain, even though Arenado's 34 now, I believe, and his career's in limbo, I've never seen a player, an infielder, as good as Nolan Arenado. He was a highlight reel waiting to happen every single night.
Yeah. No, his ability to take the ball and whip it to first base on a dime like that, it just felt like there was no ball trajectory that was out of reach for Nolan if it was on that side of the diamond for him to be able to make the play. And I agree with you, especially, hitting aside what Nolan was able to do in the infield defensively is something that we may not see here in Colorado for a long time.
Yeah.
Speaking of numbers, I did want to put up a handful of career numbers for Todd.
Sure.
And it's going to lead into my next question. You see there, he's got almost 2,250 games played, over 2,500 hits. He's a five-time All-Star, 316 career batting average, 1,400 RBIs, all the like. My question to you was going to be, as somebody who you mentioned earlier that you've never gotten closer to an athlete than you have with Todd, and you've covered this team so extensively for so long. Is there a particular statistic or a particular moment as it relates to Todd Helton's career with the Rockies that stands out, that signifies just how important or the magnitude of his impact on the organization, that solidifies him as Mr. Rocky, the Hall of Fame, inductee?
Yeah, there's a couple things. One, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I believe it was his 2000 season, which was where he flirted with hitting 400 into August. I mean, that was incredible. He hit in May of 2000, and I hope I have the season right. I'm almost sure I do. In May of 2000, for an entire month, and I think it was 28 games, he hit 516.
Wow.
Against Major League pitching in the month. He was incredible that year, and he had other years like that until the back injury sapped some of his power. That's one of the things that year, and I remember for the Hall of Fame induction for the Hall of Fame program, I did a big story about that season and about just how off the charts incredible it was. So that's number one. Number two, I think, was October in 2007, and it was Helton who sparked it with that home run off Saito to beat the Dodgers. Todd, who never showed a ton of emotion on the baseball field, rounding the bases, whipping off his helmet, going into that mosh pit. Who would have known that was kind of what the kindling or the spark for one of the greatest runs in baseball history? And Todd was instrumental in that entire run. I remember when they made the World Series, that was just a remarkable moment for him and his family. Those are the two things that stand out to me.
Yeah, I got chills a little bit as you were saying that, thinking
Yeah.
back on some of those moments and that
Yeah.
famous photo of
Oh my
Todd
God.
in
Yeah.
celebration. It's like you get goosebumps just kind of thinking
Yeah.
about it. It's rare, Patrick, that I have the opportunity to have had back-to-back conversations as it relates to some pretty historic things with the Colorado Rockies. I mentioned at the top that I talked to Spilla yesterday about Ubaldo Jimenez's 2010 season and just the dominance that he displayed in that kind of singular year. And he had a quote to me that I literally have been thinking about since I got off the air with him almost exactly 24 hours ago, because I had never thought about it, but it totally put it in perspective. And I was curious to get your thoughts on whether or not you agree. In relation to Ubaldo that year, he said that with the stuff that Ubaldo brought and the versatility of his pitches and the way that he was able to consistently playing half of his games at Coors Field dominate on the mound, it felt like in that year, Ubaldo Jimenez was, and he quoted it, was Paul Skeens before Paul Skeens in terms of the dominance and the command that he was able to have from the mound. What was your overall recollection, or what do you remember most about that 2010 season with Ubaldo?
A couple things. Spilly's absolutely right. Back then, the thing I remember about Ubaldo so well is he had an almost unhittable power sinker.
Mm-hmm.
Like people talk now about people throwing 100 miles an hour, 99, 98 consistently, but that's usually up in the zone. Ubaldo could throw a 98, 99, 100 mile an hour fastball with sink. I mean, imagine that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no way pitchers could handle or batters could handle that. That's one of the things I remember, his ability to strike out opponents. And I was a little surprised by it because if you recall, he had a very funky motion,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was almost different parts and pieces all coming to this motion, but he was able, at least for a couple, 3 seasons, to repeat that delivery, and he just overwhelmed hitters. It was remarkable, and for probably 2/3 of that season. Now he didn't win the Cy Young. I believe he came in
Third, I
third.
think. Yeah.
Third. But for 2/3 of that season, he was the best pitcher in baseball, no question about it. And you mentioned it too. His ability to do it not only on the road but at home, at altitude at Coors Field was remarkable. And the thing that was so cool about Ubaldo, he was the most humble,
Yeah.
mild-mannered, nicest guy you could ever imagine. Still is. I still talk to him on occasion. Ubaldo was amazing, which made it all the weirder when after he was traded to what was then the Indians, now the Guardians in Cleveland, where he and Troy Tulowitzki, who did not like each other, Tulo did not like Ubaldo. Uh, when Ubaldo plunked Tulo in a Cactus League game, motion for Tulo to come to the mound and fight him. That's one of the most memorable moments of my career, and I was both laughing and just amazed that went down. That was crazy.
Yeah, similar to the 2007 year with Helton, and then to 2010 when you've got Ubaldo and Troy and Cargo, and we've seen the Rockies have very memorable contributing players and kind of genuine franchise face worthy players kind of throughout their organization's history. And obviously we got close to a taste of it there in 2007 and maybe flirted with it in 2018 before things kind of fell apart. And I think that these are the things, as I mentioned to Spilla yesterday, these are the things that I feel like no matter, if they're going for a third potential season where they could lose 100 straight game or 100, games in a season for a third consecutive time, or they're this or they're that. It's those kind of memories and these kind of things, these kind of storylines that just keep us coming back every year to the Rockies because of the promise and the potential of what could be there. And now that baseball is almost here again, and it feels like opening day or Coors Field is going to be right around the corner on April 5th, I'm excited to kind of get into it again a little bit later with some of the newer, younger faces that have the next chance to be, an iteration of what we've seen from these greats in the past.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's a really good point. Let's face it, the Rockies have not been the very successful franchise, right? Born '93 was their first year, and 5 playoff appearances. They haven't won a playoff game outside of the wild card game in '18 against the Cubs in like forever. And they're sprinkled with some really great memories and great players. And what I always try to hold on to, and I get as frustrated as anybody, believe me, this is not an easy team or franchise to cover. It's frustrating. And I get it. I get the fans' frustration. And over the last 4 or 5 years, I've sensed an apathy. There is fan apathy out there, regardless of the fact that they draw nearly 32,000 fans per game. But I will say this, and we've seen it over and over and over. If the Rockies turn out an entertaining product and a winning product on the field, Colorado and Denver becomes a baseball hotbed. It's there. It's just unfortunate that the franchise has mismanaged things so poorly the last, say, 6 years. But you're right. There is some good young talent coming up. Just have to see how soon it blossoms. But there's always hope, right? Particularly on March 4th or whatever today is. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we're basically a month away from our home opener here with the Rockies. And on the way out, because you just brought up something that I have kind of said amongst our circles and around the office here that I have no way of proving and probably won't live long enough for it to come to fruition. But I have always said that the prospect of Colorado and, it's Broncos country and it's this and it's that. I have always said that I feel that if the Rockies were ever to trip and fall into a World Series title, if by some cataclysmic, cosmic alignment that were to happen, the celebration, both the postseason run and the momentum behind it and the postseason parade championship celebration would rival closely what we saw with the Denver Broncos in Super Bowl 50, 32, or 33. A championship parade for the Colorado Rockies may be or have a chance to be the biggest celebration, of a sports team in this state. That's how much underlying passion there is for the Rockies or baseball in this state.
I agree with that. And I think beyond just the passion for it, I think if the Rockies were actually to ever do that, and I can't imagine I'm going to still be covering this beat at that point. But think about it. You're right. It's not just that they win. It would be the run toward it, the whole summer-long baseball, and then the long playoff stretch, and then the World Series. And I think one of the things that makes baseball special, and one of the reasons I love it so much, even though I realize it's no longer American pastime, baseball, because of the pace of the game, because the players, you see them so often, it's a real up close and personal sport. They're not wearing helmets. They're not wearing face masks. I guess basketball maybe is up close and personal too. The Nuggets certainly have a love affair with this city right now. But I think baseball, because you get to know them over this long stretch, there is something special about that. And you're right. I think, I'm not going to say they would top the Avs or the Nuggets or the Broncos, but it was certainly the enthusiasm, the parade, the celebration would be equal to any of those. I definitely believe.
I love it. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you carving out a little of your time, and I'm sure we're going to catch up again real soon. As I said, we're about a month away from the start of real baseball once again. So thank you so much for helping us take this trip down memory lane, and we'll catch up again soon.
Okay, man. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Of course. The rest of you out there, have a great rest of your day. Make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will catch you at the same time in the same place tomorrow. I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the work.